page and Keene State College's YouTube channel. One final thing. I hope you will join us for our next program scheduled for Monday, March 21st at 7 p.m. Gwen Fries, an editor from the Adams Papers editorial project at Mass Historical Society, will join us to talk about the papers of President John Adams and his family and the ongoing efforts to prepare the papers for publication. I hope you will join us again on March 21st. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Hastings. So good morning to everyone. Enjoy.
Good morning, Rodney. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for deciding to spend your well, rather gloomy Saturday morning with us. I promise we'll brighten your day a bit. My name is Tim Hastings, and I graduated from the History and Archives program, the master's program here at Keene State back in May 2021. And in the fall, I'll be attending PhD in Early History program at UMass Amherst. And I'm also soon to be a member of Phi Alpha Theta, which is the History Honor Society, which Professor Obien has just mentioned. And we'll have an induction ceremony at the end of April. So if you're interested in that and you're a student, feel free to reach out to Professor Obien and he'll be able to give you more details. So I'm really excited to be able to be facilitating this transcription workshop for you this morning. And just before I introduce our instructor, I just want to give a brief outline of what we're going to be doing so there aren't any surprises. So we're going to begin by Brian, who's our instructor. He's going to go over his strategy for transcribing documents, strategies that he's developed over several decades as a state archivist of New Hampshire. So he'll begin by explaining the conventions used in transcribing documents, and then he'll discuss the practice of historical editing when organizing and transcribing collections of documents. And then we're going to move on to applying this information to collections from the Keene State College Digital Commons. And I just want to mention that the Digital Commons are a digital repository of a variety of different types of resources here through the Mason Library. And these include some we're going to be using today, some from the Civil War, colonial America, and also the Holocaust, and also other arts and humanities resources. So I think that's a really important resource for students here at Keene State. I know there are a lot of history students who are watching, so I suggest taking a look at the comments. They're really useful, and they're useful for me in my master's work. But as I was saying, after Brian goes over his methodology about the transcription process, we're going to apply those lessons to the Willard J. Templeton letters, a Civil War veteran, and then also the papers, couple letters from the collection of Meshach Ware, who was a very important revolutionary in New Hampshire. So what's going to happen is Brian is going to present us with a letter from these collections. And we're going to have around 15 minutes or so, 15 to 20 minutes to do the transcription. And we're going to go over that, answer questions. Then we're going to repeat that for the next two letters. And throughout this process, feel free to put your questions, I believe, in the Q&A. And we've also enabled the hand raising feature. So you'll be able to talk at some point if you raise your hand, and we can call on you. And I'm going to be monitoring that, Misty Kennedy as well. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our instructor, Brian Burford. He was raised in Connecticut, and he graduated from Keene State with a bachelor's in history in 1973, but it's either 1972 or 1973. We've been going back and forth about that. And he attended graduate school at the University of Virginia before returning to New Hampshire, where he got married and became a land surveyor. He eventually got his land surveying license in 1983 and set up his own business. And then in 1995, he became the state records manager at the New Hampshire State Archives. And after 15 years in this position, he was promoted to the director of the Division of Archives and Records Management. And he only recently retired from that position in August of 2021. But he has continued on a part-time basis as they're monitoring or navigating this transition. And finally, among all these other things, Brian is also on Keene State's Alumni Association Board of Directors. He's active in the New Hampshire Archives Group, the New Hampshire Land Surveyors Association, and the Council of State Archivists. And most importantly to me, he is affiliated with the Masters in History and Archives program here at Keene State, where he provides invaluable guidance and resources to the master's students. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Burford.
Oh, thank you, Tim. I appreciate all of those kind words. I'd like to put up the presentation if we could.
I will do that.
Okay, thanks. I'll just mention while I'm here that Tim is actually going to be doing the technical work because I am a quill pen man myself, and all this newfangled technology is something that I need younger minds to help me with. So I really appreciate Tim's willingness to help me with this. As you can see, we're hoping to have the next couple of hours to talk about transcriptions and historical editing. And the idea of this is to sort of give you a little bit of fun and at the same time help you with some ideas of how you might do some transcriptions of something of your own. So Tim, if we would go ahead and flip to the next. Tim?
Yep. Can you see the next one?
No, I'm still seeing the title page.
Oh, Rodney, what are you seeing?
I see the next slide. So.
Okay. All right. So maybe it's my internet connection that is not working well.
And people from the audience say they can see this.
If I can interrupt for just a second, Brian, your internet is getting a little bit spotty. So we'll just, if for some reason you get bumped out again, we'll just pause for half a second till you can get back in.
So.
Okay, thank you. All right. When it comes to transcribing, the question would be, why are we doing this? And what the Library of Congress tells people is that it allows for word searching of digital documents, which I think is nice, and I'm certainly not going to contradict the Library of Congress, but I use it for a number of other reasons. The principal one is it helps me think clearer about the document that I'm looking at. If I just read it, it goes in one eye and out the other, I suppose we could say. But when I sit and actually transcribe it, I sit and think about the choice of words and what they mean and what the background is and what the author is trying to say and what the addressee might be thinking about it. So when we do transcribing of documents, I would urge you to copy only what you see, copy just what you see. And follow the order and the layout as best you can. Now, you can use things when you come to words that have been crossed out, you can use the words crossed out in brackets, probably bracket, crossed out, colon, and then the word that has been crossed out, end bracket, in the place where that is. But you should put it in there. That is certainly a part of the transcript that you're making. This is certainly something that the author wrote, and you should be including it in the transcript. I would like to point out as well that penmanship has changed over the last 300 to 400 years. And that, of course, is what we will be looking at in this particular class, will be documents from the last roughly 300 years or so, 1700 to 1865 or so. If you are personally interested in transcribing other periods of time or other parts of the country other than northern New England, you may be running into even further changes in penmanship, in the style of writing. But that's one of the things that you're going to be getting used to in this class. And when you transcribe, is you'll be getting used to the conventions of that particular author. And of course, every particular author changes their penmanship over time. Certainly, my penmanship now, at age 71, is significantly different than when I graduated from Keene State College 50 years ago. So my handwriting, if you're studying my papers, you would see a change in handwriting over time. Keep these in mind as you transcribe. What K. Kirkham, a person whom I rely on for ideas of transcription, has suggested is you keep an open mind as to what it is you're looking for. So, for example, letters have changed that over the last 300 years or so, and some of them could be troublesome to us. For example, just that long S that looks like an F should be transcribed as an S. The letter P may have a stem that is taller than the bowl, that round part. When I learned to write in cursive back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, I was taught to put a high stem on a lowercase p. That has since gone away in more modern cursive. And for those of you who haven't had cursive, it's probably all a little Greek, but that's okay. You'll get used to it as you go along. Sometimes the E looks like a backwards 3, or even looks like a 3, like a backwards E. And it should be transcribed as an E. You'll know what it is if it begins to make sense to you. An A may be open at the top, so it looks a little like a U. If you see a 0 with a small O inside near the top of the 0, it's very likely to be a lowercase e. And for example, if you see a J, it could very well be a lowercase I, as in 13, XIIJ. So again, keep an open mind about what you're reading and think about if it makes sense. Tim, could we go to the next, please?
Yep, I just proceeded.
Okay, yeah, and I do see it.
Okay, perfect.
So as I mentioned, some of the styles of penmanship have changed over time. And some people's penmanship, actually, there were different styles that were taught to people. So you may see loops and curlicues that show up and have nothing more than ornamental purpose to it, but can sometimes be confusing. When you're looking at material in a document, look for similar shapes in other words in the text, because it may be clear as to what was meant in this other word and give you an idea of how this author uses that particular style of script. I would also suggest, and this is not something in the slide, but if you're having trouble, don't hesitate to ask someone else to look at the word that you're trying to decipher. This is something that I do, even though we're the professionals and we're supposed to know it all. it never hurts to ask someone else for their opinion as to what a particular word might be, because sometimes they see something that you don't. If it's entirely unreadable, it's okay to put the word illegible in brackets where the errant word is. So again, what we're looking to do is we're trying to put this cursive or earlier writing style into a more modern style that is easier for us modern people to read. If you're transcribing on a computer, I would encourage you to save frequently, because things do go funky at times, as you're probably seeing my internet connection going funky from time to time here. When words are misspelled or separated due to hyphenated words, line break, the Library of Congress says, go ahead, put in a bracket, the word tag, colon, and then the correct spelling, so that if a person is doing a word search on the docket, on the document, they will find that word, which they wouldn't have found if it's been broken on two separate lines with a hyphen in between, or if it had been misspelled. And that's fine. I don't typically do that, but I think that that's a very acceptable practice and has a good purpose to it. My practice is probably more likely to put a footnote, to footnote that particular word and put the proper word in the footnote. I find that that's easier for me to understand. And so this is going to be something that you're going to have to become aware of and decide for yourself what you think makes best sense to a person trying to read it. Notes that are added for context should be included in an introduction to your transcript, or forward, or be placed in the transcript in brackets, such as bracket comment and then what your comment is going to be. Again, I tend to put these comments into the footnotes. The important thing is that we make it clear that this is not in the original document, but is something that is added by the transcriber, so that a person reading it understands what's in the document and also what is also been added for context. If there's a wax seal or a postage stamp or a chart or a drawing, a map or something in the original, you can put in brackets that there's a seal that indicates where that seal is, or that map or that drawing. Tim, may I have the next slide?
Yes, and could I ask a viewer's question real quick?
Sure. Please.
Bonnie asks about punctuation, because in 18th century writing, it looks like there are a lot of really long, what we would call run-on sentences. Do you have any recommendation for that?
My recommendation is to stick with the punctuation that you have. I find that a lot of times people have ended a sentence with a sort of a long dash. But there are other times when they clearly ended a sentence and then just kept on writing and there's no punctuation at all. And if I'm going to add punctuation for clarity's sake, I put it in brackets. So if I'm certain that it makes sense that there's a sentence and it ends and starts anew and there's no punctuation there, I might put in brackets a period, so that try to make it clear that there's no punctuation there, but it's something that I have added to the transcript.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good. Please ask any questions at all. I love questions. I love to make this more focused on what you want it to be rather than what I necessarily want it to be. So please feel free to ask questions. I love questions. I've put on this page some of the common abbreviations or alternate spellings that I have run into. And many of these have come to me from a work, and I'll speak of it in a few minutes, but of Kay Kirkham, who published a book on reading early North American documents. So, for example, I quite often see the word inst, I-N-S-T, and this means a day in the current month. So, for example, typically I see this where it says, I received yours of the 8th inst, and it means that you wrote to me on the 8th of this month, and I've received that letter. When you see ult, U-L-T, that means some day in the previous month. So if I received yours of the 27th ult, it was, I received your letter from the 27th of February. Put in inst and put in ult. But if you feel that that's going to be confusing to the person that is using your transcript, you can footnote it by saying this would have been, March 7th or February 27th or whatever. We're all familiar with the ampersand, but it is a shortening of the term et cetera from the Latin. Kay Kirkham also apparently did quite a lot with military records, because he had brig and cav and coal and head QRs and reg, all military terms, but they do show up in records that we do find, so keep them in mind. Personally, I find that they are pretty self-explanatory. When I see RR, I happen to be a railroad buff, so this to me is quite obvious too. But if you see RR, it doesn't mean rural route, unless it does mean rural route. Vols, V-O-L-S, can of course mean volunteers, but it also may mean volumes. So yes, again, you're going to need to be nimble, keep an open mind, and try to determine what makes sense. Tim, did we have a question pop up?
Yes, we had something in the chat. A viewer was wondering if we were going to make the slideshow available, and I think we will, correct? Because it will have a list of
Yes, yes, we will. So.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. So you don't have to write all of these down. That's good. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you for asking the question. Good. So just to continue on, just a few more of these. We're all familiar with the ye old bookshop. The Y is really short for a TH. And this is a stylistic letter, or ligature is really what it amounts to, that stands for TH. So I personally keep the Y because it's common to me to understand that it means TH. But if you are transcribing and you would like to make it clear to the reader that will be reading your transcription, you may transfer that to THE and yet to that. Then again, some misspelled or alternate spelling words. Just so you know, you could see that ATT, ACTEED certainly would sound like attacked, and DO certainly would be short for ditto. And then a few of these other things may suggest that the way people pronounced words has changed slightly. So there were some things, or it's very difficult, or there she is. You've all heard those cliches, but they many times they do show up in transcriptions, in documents. As Tim mentioned, I am a land surveyor, and I do remember a deed that I ran across for a parcel of land in New Hampshire that was described as a HETAH piece, H-E-A-T-A-H, a HETAH piece. And for quite a while, I had to think about it. And it occurred to me only after quite a bit of mulling over that what was really meant was H-E-A-T-E-R, a heater piece. And a heater piece was a term that was used for the name of an iron that people used to iron their clothes and take wrinkles out of their clothes. This was a piece of land that was shaped somewhat triangular. And in fact, it really was roughly a triangular tract of land. So sometimes you have to be creative, think outside that box, and try to understand, try to listen to what the person was saying, as well as read what the person was saying. Tim, could we have the next slide?
Yep, there we go.
Yes, I see it. Good, thank you. So names are often abbreviated if, in fact, they aren't even substituted for nicknames. So, for example, Molly might be short for Mary. I don't know how Molly is short for Mary, but it could be that. I also find that the term Dolly, D-O-L-L-Y, could be short for darling, you're my darling daughter type thing. So here's a list of some of the common abbreviations that were used in the 1700s, 1800s, even in the 1600s. I would particularly call your attention to, in the first column, down near the bottom, the J-N-O is John, not Jonathan. J-O-N is commonly known for Jonathan because it ends in an N, but J-N-O is often the abbreviation for John. We can see, to me, it makes sense. Jerry for Jeremiah, Jazz for James. We still see some of these. Chaz for Charles. I know several people whose names are Charles, but go by the name Chaz. And William is very common still even now. But these are some of the names that are abbreviated. Charlotte in the right-hand column. Hannah, Hezekiah. Hezekiah, you probably aren't going to run into very much in the modern age, but certainly was common during the 17 and 1800s. At the very bottom, X for her, for Christopher. Certainly the X was used to stand for Christ or the cross. And so certainly when you see signatures where X has made his mark, they are invoking the word Christ when they are signing it, sort of a pledge that by Christ's grace they are agreeing to what was written before, even though they can't write their own name. But the X stands for Christ or Christopher, as you can see. So that would certainly be something that would set me back for a bit. But I think eventually I would understand. But perhaps by having been exposed to this, it will make sense to you in the future. So Tim, may I have the next one, please? This is a deed dated from 1726. And it's a deed from Mary Brewster to a Nathaniel Ware for 3 slaves. The slaves were a Black father, an Indian mother, and a child that was born to the 2 parents. But I'm asking you to look at the handwriting. Notice the handwriting. This handwriting is, I find, fairly typical of that was used in the 1600s and even the 1500s and the very early 1700s. I would also point out to you that Mary Brewster's name has also been at times spelled Brewster. And Nathaniel Ware has been Ware. So spelling is often a matter of phonetic pronunciation. So watch for a good old New England twang or New England abbreviations, even in words and names and so on. But when you have a chance, look carefully at this document. And this document is on the KS Commons digital repository in the Meshach Ware papers. But I saw this as an example of a very early handwriting style that initially set me back in terms of studying and doing transcriptions, but I've become familiar with this style of handwriting. May I have the next one, please? This is a close-up of the first part of it, so it'll give you a better chance of seeing the handwriting. You can see, for example, the first word that I see is no, K-N-O-W. Below that, the word of, below that, the word widow, below that, the word for. And what the word after for is something. And I see that as the word diverse, D-I-V-E. Look at the E, sort of an open 0 with a curly Q at the top, R, and then there's an S. And the S looks like he added it afterwards, trying to correct his spelling, but for diverse good causes and consideration. So you can sort of have to keep that open mind as to what things are. Right below the words for diverse, it is the word especially. For especially, you can see the ES, sort of a strange S. There's a P, E-C-I-A-L-Y, especially, for, and in consideration. So you can see, I only wanted to point out to you, this is a style of handwriting at the very nearly the end of this particular style of handwriting. So if you get into records that are later than, say, 1750, you probably won't see much of this style of handwriting. I would like to add one other thing as a side note, and that is, you'll notice at the top right-hand corner are numbers. Now, in my transcriptions, add these numbers. These numbers were probably not put there by the author themselves. They were probably added later as a part of a collection of letters or documents or whatever. And I don't know exactly what they mean, but they probably had some meaning. And if I run across an old index, these numbers may have suddenly have a meaning that becomes clear to me or clear to the person that is using the transcription. So I typically will transcribe these as a part of the document. Remember what I say, transcribe what you see, and try to stay as close as you can to form. Now, it seems to me that the numbers 1, 2, 3 are crossed out, and this is where I would put crossed out, or when I am transcribing, I frequently am able to use a feature of a single line through the numbers and letters, and I would actually cross it out in my transcription. So just these are just conventions that I use, and they may be helpful to you and they may not be. It's something that you would need to do yourself. Tim, may I have the next slide, please?
I just have a quick question, Brian.
Sure.
You mentioned that you probably wouldn't see this writing after 1750 or so. Do you have any idea why do you kind of see a very distinct change after 1750, or do you have any idea why that would happen, or why that happened, or anything?
And that is a very, very good question, and which is my way of saying I have no idea what the answer is, except I do know that styles of handwriting change. So, for example, every few hundred years, it seems someone comes out with something maybe a little more stylish, and it's a matter of really, it's a matter of style. I know when I was learning to write cursive as a tot, we had a specific book that my teachers pulled out, and all of us students sat there with pieces of paper with lines on it. It was cheap paper. There were even pieces of wood still in it. So it sort of dislodged our writing as we wrote, or at least that was the excuse that I always told the teacher, that it was the piece of wood that caused my pen to deflect. But it was a particular style. And as I mentioned, when I learned to write a lowercase p, we started on the line and then curved upwards, and then the stem went well down, and then we brought the stem back up and made the bowl on the line again. That was the style of writing that even after say the mid-1960s, lowercase p's became without that tall stem. It's just a matter of style, I think.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. Rodney mentioned too that if education expanded and there was more standardization in the mid-18th century, then that would probably also help explain that, and also people changing over time.
You also have to be aware that other things were happening in the English society at this time. For example, this was a time when dictionaries started coming out, explaining the meaning of words and even the standard spelling of a word. So this is happening at this time. Also at this particular time in history, there is a change in the calendar. What calendar were they following? In England, the English nation changed from the Julian calendar, which originated in Roman times, to the Gregorian calendar. So you have all of this change coming about in a period of roughly 100 years that we think of as perhaps the Renaissance. So you've got dictionaries, you've got styles of change in handwriting, you've got in standardization of handwriting, and standardization of so many different ways of counting and calculating and so on. So this is a particular period of time that I think is one of change that we saw take place. And it sort of came later in North America. It took a while to cross the ocean, but sometime around the 1700s, these changes took place.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. If you would go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is the reference book that I personally have come to use many, many times over the past few decades. This is K. Kirkham. I labored until about 2 months ago under the impression that this was a woman that had written it, but it turns out it's not. It is a man whose name was K. Kirkham. And he published this particular edition in 1964 in Salt Lake City. There have been other editions later, but I have found them to be less helpful because they weren't printed as clearly. They were more mimeograph or photocopy or something of that sort. I found that going back to this second edition from 1964 is really much more helpful to me. And so I would encourage you to see if you can find it. If you can find any of the other editions, this one is not easy to find, although Tim recently found a copy of it, and I recently found a second copy on eBay. So it is still available, but I do think it's a very good book. You can see on the right-hand side, I just took a sample page, but you can begin to see some of how Kate Kirkham has got it set up. He gives you what the letters are, the actual letters are, and then his transcriptions underneath it or beside it, so that you can begin to see examples of some of these things. Tim, would you mind flipping to next? Yeah, thanks. Just a very quick discussion about historical editing. To me, this is a logical extension of my work as a transcriber. I like to take several transcriptions that are related to one another, put them in an organized format so that people can begin to see from document to document to document, a flow of thought. And so that's one of the things, is to try to organize related documents into a helpful order. Typically, this is a chronological order, but not always. I am just now currently reading a doctoral dissertation written in 1994 by a fellow in London, who is critiquing the historical editing of a couple of editors of Roman land surveying texts from the medieval period. And one of his criticisms of these editors is that they did not put them into what the evidence would suggest was a chronological order. So, and that's fine. That's this PhD candidate's opinion, and they're welcome to it, and it's well taken. But just to give you some context, this sometimes can become important, how you choose to organize related documents. And typically, I think an editor will use notes of various types, either within the text or as footnotes, to clarify and to add further background information to make it clear what the author is thinking about. So, for example, this same PhD thesis from 1994 used a combination of both footnotes and brackets for comments within the text. And I found the brackets within the text to be very distracting. And I finally decided that what I'm going to do is ignore everything that's in brackets and just read his commentary. And if I need to, I can go back and look at the footnotes or even reflect on what's in the brackets. But to my way of thinking, putting notes, clarification, context, and so on in footnotes to me is easier to understand. If the documents are found in a collection, and the foreword or the introduction would provide a complete citation for the collection. So in other words, if this is the Meshach Ware collection, you might be saying, all right, the citation for the Meshach Ware papers, all of the Meshach Ware papers, is online at kscommons.com. And then further links URL to it. But you would also probably indicate that the original is found at the New Hampshire State Archives, because that whole collection came from the New Hampshire State Archives and was digitally created and put online by Keene State College, Keene State College Library Archives and the Mason Library. And so that would be the citation for all of the documents in that collection. But if there are multiple collections and you're using documents from multiple collections, then you're probably going to want to cite each document individually. So in today's class, we have a document from a Civil War soldiers' letters, and we also have documents from a colonial administrator's collection. So we would probably begin to cite individually so that it becomes clear. So putting a citation in the foreword or introduction is not going to be as helpful. Tim, could we go ahead and hit the next? So again, the National Archives say, don't try to maintain line breaks at the ends of lines, just keep right on going. My personal preference is to maintain those line breaks. And the reason that I do that is, as we saw earlier when I was trying to describe where some of the words were in that 1726 deed from Mary Brewster to Nathaniel Ware, I was trying to get you to count down the number of lines in the original. And if the transcript maintains those same line breaks, then I think it's easier to relate what you're seeing in the transcript to what you then might be looking for in the original, to determine whether the transcription is an accurate transcription of what the author was really saying. So this again is going to be your personal decision as to how you do it. The Library of Congress says, don't try to maintain the line breaks, just write it out. And I say there are occasions where it's valuable to maintain the line breaks. Again, the Library of Congress says don't try to maintain columns and charts. And it's okay to write something like Jones dot Portsmouth dot Mariner dot 37. You know that there are 4 columns, one with the name, one with the location the person came from, one with their status in society, and one with their age. So it would make then sense for Martha Adams dot Hampton Falls dot servant dot 16. You'd still understand that. But then I feel that there are times when you will try to maintain those columns, particularly where if you're dealing with something where the numbers are to be added or multiplied or subtracted, then it begins to make more sense because we're trained to understand those columns. You have to be careful, obviously, because you type it out, transcribe it in Word, and then you convert it to a PDF file. PDF may change the spacing a little bit and misalign the columns, but sometimes you still do the best you can. Tim, may I have the next one, please? So typically, some of the things that a historical editor might include with the transcriptions are other documents that are going to help the reader, the user of the historically edited documents, understand them better. So, for example, you might want to put in a genealogy of the family members. If this is correspondence between the family, it might help the user, the people that are going to be using your transcripts, to understand better who's being written to and who's the letter from. There might be some kind of a timeline. This timeline might include events that are going on at about the same period of time that are significant events. The fact that Meshach Ware is receiving a letter from his brother at about the time that certain things are happening in New Hampshire, such as the settlement of certain town areas and so on, could be significant. So having some of these auxiliary documents can help the reader understand, get into the mindset. And certainly, I find it helpful when I'm doing the transcription to have these things, because it helps me understand what it is I'm transcribing. And I figure if it helps me understand what I'm transcribing, it might be helping people who are following me and using my transcriptions. So there could be a map of the principal locations mentioned in the documents, or a bibliography or reference materials that the reader may wish to follow for additional context. So these are some of the things that in historical editing we can add as editors that could help the people who are going to be using our transcriptions. But Tim, may I have the next one, please? So for our first task, I'm going to want us to take a break. Tim, maybe we'll go with the next slide. See if the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, this is better. This is the first task that I'd like to have everybody sort of take a crack at. This is a letter from Willard Templeton to friends. It's addressed to friends. It's dated April 3, 1864. I'll point out that this is the first page of a multi-page letter. So I'm hoping that Tim is going to put up the link to this letter. I don't know if it'll be in chat.
I will. Or, sorry, I have to. It's going to disrupt for a quick second in order for me to access what I want to do, but sure. I will put it in the chat.
All right. And I'm hoping that everybody online will take 10 to 15 minutes to try their hand at transcribing it. If you have a computer available to you, that's fine. If you have a piece of paper and a pen handy, that too is fine. But just try it yourself to see what you come up with. And we'll come back to this in just a few minutes to talk about what you came up with versus what we come up with in our transcription, so that we can sort of compare notes. So I'm going to sort of butt out unless there's someone with a quick question that might want it.
Yes, feel free. There is a question from Mary who asks, do you use a soft return or a hard return for line breaks?
I press very hard with my quill pen.
Yeah.
So I presume that's a hard break. I'm not sure what is the difference. Tim, do you know?
I'm
Do you
not
know the
completely.
difference?
I don't completely know myself either. I don't know if it's a matter of spacing or if it's a return to the next line. I'm not completely sure.
I
But-
use the carriage return as though
Okay.
as though I'm typing on a. Well, we used to
Right.
call them typewriters.
So you're
with
going
a
down to the
carriage.
next. Yeah, going down to the next line then, right?
It would go down to the next line.
Okay. All right.
So I'm hoping that answers the question. And if not, please ask the question again, and I'll try to answer it better.
Thanks.
So Tim, have you been able to do some of this transcription?
I have. Yep. I've actually been able to finish this one.
Okay, good, good.
We'll see about the next one though.
Yeah. Well, to me, they're all exercises, not something that has to be done, but
Yes.
a chance to sort of test yourself.
Right. Exactly. Well, I feel like we're starting out with one that's a little more accessible than perhaps the second one, but I'm excited to see how everyone does. So we would probably have about just a minute or two left, let's say, and then we'll get back to it and check in on everyone.
Sounds good.
Brian, can you repost that message that you sent out earlier to everyone? Because it was only Tim,
went to the.
Tim and myself. So if you can repost that later to everyone, that would be appreciated. So
Okay.
You can also cut and paste it, and
you can cut and paste it,
think so,
or
yeah.
yeah. So
Not on my
you-
tablet.
So when you write, make sure it's to everyone and not just the host and panelists. 'Cause
Oh,
I had that
Oh,
same issue.
I just learned something. That's
yes,
great.
so that's learning something new is good, Brian. You know,
Yes,
that.
yes.
So
Even someone of my advanced age can learn.
wow. Yeah. So
Alrighty. Should we go ahead and start looking at the transcription, Brian?
Sure. All right. Close out of that. All right. I think that the next slide, Tim, is okay. And so these are questions that I would ask of each of the participants. Were there any words you had trouble reading? What is the letter about? And often understanding the point of the letter or the points that the author is making help us understand the words that we stumble over. So, Tim, did you have any trouble with any of the words?
Yeah, well, I sometimes have issues with place names and given names. So for example, I believe it says in 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth line down, really, from where it begins, left me. I believe it says it's either Morristown or Harristown, and that one kind of tripped me up a little bit.
That is Morristown. That's
Okay, good. I got it.
Morris.
Perfect. I got it the first time around.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And you'll notice that he put in the word for, sort of superscript.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when I transcribe, particularly on a computer, I do put in a superscript,
Okay.
so that the word is in the correct place, but it is sort of raised as well.
Let's see. Eric, in the chat says he found one illegible word, a part where it says "accept much love," illegible, Willard. So I believe is that on the second page? So this is a multi-page letter, correct?
That this is a multi-page. So
he's talking about the upside down lettering at the top here.
Yes.
So
yes.
and
that is something. What did you do anything with that, Tim?
I did not.
Okay. All right. You hadn't gotten that far.
No, I think I just I slightly disregarded the upside down script.
Now, my way of handling this was to transcribe all 4 pages of this letter, and then noticed that he had this upside down section that it seems to be an afterthought, a PS. He sort of ran out of room. So I would have put it at the end of my transcription, but I would not have put it upside down. I would have actually done it properly, but
okay.
But I would have put it at the end of my transcription.
Okay, that makes total sense.
I recently saw a letter where they got to the bottom of the page and then they ran up the right-hand side of the page till they got to the top of the page, and then upside down across the top of the page till they got to the left edge of the paper, and then down the left edge of the paper until they got to the bottom of the left edge, and then they sort of wedged in the last few words in their sentence. and I did not try to duplicate that in my transcription. I put it all at the end.
Fair. You did that. I think that makes a lot of sense to do that way. I just saw an interesting thing in the chat. Jacqueline wrote that.
Yes.
She found something that looked like Sin Carafe, and it took coming back to it to realize that it was in camp. And I really like that because it does give it does demonstrate that you have to may move past what you can't see and get the full context, and then you'll be able to move back and figure it out that way.
Right. And that often happens to me is I'll sort of put down maybe sort of what it looks like, or leave it blank or something. And then as I go on, it begins to make sense to me what that was, what word makes sense. Now, the fact that I can't quite see it, I might put it in brackets to say that this is what I think it is. But if I'm convinced that I do see the letters finally that I think it is, then I go ahead and just transcribe it.
Right. Exactly. Let's see. We have other examples of that happening. People skipping and going back and being able to kind of learning the script and becoming more comfortable. There's one also. This person can't read the word after "we left Morristown" in for 11 days. Let's see.
We left Morristown for 11 days previous to the last Friday. We marched 15 to 20 miles per day during the rainstorms and snowstorms and any quantity of mud.
Sounds like quite a slog.
It it must have been awful.
Yes.
And the fact
keep going.
that he came down with a bad cold or whatever and was feeling horrible at the same time must have made it only worse.
Yes, I completely agree. It's funny, somebody mentioned that when you were talking about the way they were filling the letter writer had been filling up every margin and every orientation. Somebody wrote that her mother writes exactly that way when she writes her letters.
Sure. I've done it myself on letters when I actually wrote letters.
I got to save paper. There's somebody could not read the third line of blank hundreds. I believe this is of 240 miles, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And in fact, when I went on Google Maps and I put in Covington, Kentucky, and put in Morristown, I think that the Google Maps told me that it was 239.6 miles or something of that sort.
Okay.
So
spot on.
And so this is the kind of a thing that in historical editing, I would be sure to put in a map of that trip because I think it might help people understand better where his particular regiment or squadron or troop or whatever, or brigade or whatever it was actually traveling.
Sounds good. Is this Morristown, Tennessee?
I think it's actually in North Carolina, but it may be Tennessee. I can't remember now.
Okay, sounds good. And I believe Jane has her hand up. Misty, if you could let her speak real quick.
Absolutely.
Hello, Jane. Can you hear us?
You'll just need to unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and post your question.
Never mind. I found the link.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. But
wonderful.
Perfect. Oh, we have another hand up. Let's see. Betsy.
Hi, what comes after mud and before cold? About
It says I took a fever.
a fever.
No, excuse me. No, a severe. Severe. And he's misspelled severe. I took a severe cold.
All right, I was seeing it as, I couldn't get past it being river. Okay, severe cold.
A severe cold, yes.
Let's see. And there's a question also. What is the word at the beginning of the sentence where he begins talking about the severe cold? And did we just answer that one? Let's see.
And he talks about the severe cold. It's a quantity of mud.
Okay, perfect.
And that is a place where I would be putting in bracket, period, bracket, because I believe that he's actually ended a sentence, but I don't see a period in my copy.
Okay.
So I would be inserting a punctuation mark that I don't see in the original. And I want to make sure that the user of my transcript understands that I've added that. I've interpreted this to be the end of a sentence because it's logical to me.
Okay. And in a similar note too, do you spell out abbreviations in your transcriptions, or do you maybe add a bracket to clarify them when it's ambiguous? What is your convention there normally?
My convention is to footnote it.
Okay.
I keep the abbreviation as they've written it, but I try to put a footnote. I personally like footnotes because some people will know what that abbreviation is and just keep right on going. Won't need my footnote. Whereas I find that the brackets tend to be more confusing to me. So I tend to avoid the brackets and tend to try to footnote.
Okay, that sounds good. And Brian, actually, would you maybe read your transcription just for the sake of time, because we want to get to the next two letters. Would you mind reading yours just to see, maybe answer some of these questions and clarify things a bit?
Sure. And of course, it's written in Covington, Kentucky, April the 31st, 1864. April 3rd, April 3rd. That's a D. Dear friends, : at last, we find ourselves in Covington, Kentucky, after a hard march of 240 miles. 13 days ago, we left Morristown, and for 11 days previous to the last Friday, we marched 15 to 20 miles per day during rainstorms and snowstorms and any quantity of mud. I took a severe cold on the march, sleeping in the open, open air during cold rain storms. But I kept on day after day till Friday, while in a camp at Nichols. While it rained all day and night, I got wet through and through. Tim, what did you have? Oh, my soaked pants and drawers were nothing but rags and holes, about the only article of, and that's where my copy of it stops. Right, that's what I had, article of, and then went on to the next page. Are there any further questions, Tim?
I have one. This is Holly Newbold. Where you stopped at Nichols, the beginning of the next line, it looks like it has VILLE, like it's Nicholsville.
Yes, it is. Okay. I actually, I was reading directly from my copy of the original. But on the back side of that copy is my actual transcription. And yes, I had determined that it was Nicholsville, and Nichols was spelled NICKOLSVILLE.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking. All right, shall we go on to the next? Okay, good, Eric.
I think
Thank
it's
you.
a question from Helen for you.
Yeah.
Helen, do you want to?
Helen just answered on air, or asked on air rather.
There's questions in the Q&A too.
Yep. So Grant, or Professor Warder, he gave a little bit of context for this and said that by the fourth page of the same letter, Templeton is writing from Baltimore, dated April 7th.
Wow. Well, he's really traveled, because he was really going in a northerly direction. So he must have, once they reached Ohio, probably taken the train, I would imagine, to Baltimore, where he then finished writing the letter.
But yeah, to contextualize that even more, Eric wrote that Nicholsville, Virginia is about 80 miles from Morristown, Tennessee. So it's just, a tremendous amount of travel in quite abysmal conditions.
And having that kind of geographic information as auxiliary or supplementary information helps the reader put this into better context.
Right, exactly. And that would be an instance of historical editing, correct?
That's
Okay.
where I would be circling it in. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that for the sake of time, we should move on to the next.
Yes.
Next one. And what I think we'll do here is, and I'll put the letter in the chat, and we'll do another 15 minutes or so. This is definitely a major step up from the earlier one. What I suggest is that when we get back from this, do as much, transcribe as much as you can, and then I think Brian should read his transcription first, and then we can maybe discuss this a bit, just because this is a very difficult one, and for the sake of time, we just need to, I think as he reads, some questions may be answered, and I think that will be helpful. So we have about 15 minutes. So that should be we'll say about 11:45. And
That sounds good.
We'll see you then, and put questions or in the chat or Q&A, and we'll get to them. Thank you. And please let me know if you can't see, or please let me know if there are any issues with the link. I believe I did send it to everyone this time. So. Brian,
Yes.
a good question came in. I don't want to
Okay.
interrupt people's. I don't want to interrupt people's concentration, but
They're all good questions.
yes. Bonnie's asked or said she's been transcribing veterans pensions, and she noted that the certifications at the end of the letters are longer than the letter sometimes. So justice of the peace certifies that the person is who he says he is, and the clerk certifies that the justice of the peace is indeed who he says he is, and someone also certifies as the clerk is a clerk, etc. Is this a precursor to? Do you know if this is a precursor to today's notarizing of the documents?
It is a notarizing of the documents. It's the same process. Notarizing has actually gone on from Roman times. There were notaries in the Roman period, and have continued all the way up through medieval Europe and to the present day. Sometimes the responsibilities of the notary have changed. The notary today is not quite the same as a notary in Renaissance time period, or even the time period that we're talking about here. But that's what it is. It is a notarization. And then a certification, it's called an apostille, certification that the notary public really was authorized to act as a notary public. It's an apostille.
Perfect. That's really helpful. Thanks.
One thing that I noticed too, recently I was told that the New Hampshire courts, when they certify, they have the clerk of the court certify that something is a true copy of the court record. Then they have the judge certify that the clerk is the clerk. And then they have the clerk certify that the judge is a judge. To me, it seems circular logic, but that's the way the courts in New Hampshire in 2022 are working. So,
well, yeah, that definitely that echoes what Bonnie said about looking at veteran pensions. It seems to have endured then.
Tim, I have to say, I love the questions that are coming in. These are really good.
Agreed. They're really helping to give a little bit of context as well for these documents.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody. This is great.
Yeah, so we probably have about between 3 and 4 minutes maybe to finish up. And I acknowledge that this one is particularly difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult for a number of reasons. And it's one of the reasons why I chose it is because it really made me think about it a lot. There's a great deal to the letter. And if I were just sitting there and reading it, a lot of it I think would have passed over. But by actually forcing myself to read it and transcribe it, really brought home many of the details that I thought were important. This is a letter from Peter Ware to Meshach Ware. And you have to understand that Peter is an older brother of Meshach. Peter has moved away from home. He's moved to North Yarmouth, Maine, where he's settled. And he's writing back to his young brother, Meshach, who's back at home with the parents. And so this starts in the town of North Yarmouth. And that's in Maine, of course, now. It was then North Yarmouth, Massachusetts at the time, because Maine was a part of Massachusetts. So it was July the 14th, 1739. And what I would like to point out to you very quickly is this letter is only written 13 years after that 1726 slave deed, but the style of handwriting has already begun to change. This, to me, is a more accessible handwriting than was that 1729 deed. And I would hope you would find that to be the case too. But I still had some difficulties with it. It says, "Dear brother, I, having an opportunity to acquaint you concerning the affairs about religion in our town, I gladly," which is a misspelling for gladly,
Okay.
embrace it. I think he meant gladly, but got his A and L mixed up. Gladly embrace it. Since I writ to you last, Mr. Lauren have preached up that doctrine that there is more hopes of a morose tempered person being saved, the moral, and then there's something I don't know, illegible, and to prove his doctrine, he declares the Pharisees were moral and honest men, and that publicans and harlots were not, and went into the kingdom of heaven before them. And the next Sabbath, he preached up that doctrine that no man was damned but what damned himself, and that we must believe all the scriptures, whether we understood or not, and followed with another sermon that if a man prayed and seeked night and day all his days, if he once elected, he could never be saved. Mr. Cutter, holding much of the Arminian principles and vastly greater learning, minutes down all his sermons and makes a mock at the something by his plausible way of argument, had got a considerable party with him and had brought the whole town into confusion. But I think it pretty well over at present. Mr. Lauren declaring that when he came to examine his notes, he found he had preached contrary to what he aimed at or defined. And so people generally give him forgive him. The forgive is 2 words. But I think Mr. Lauren, too much an old Calvinist, and Mr. Cutter, a strong Arminian. I think that I could go on further, but I think that for the sake of time, I will stop there. and just point out that in some of what I've footnoted here, that I did find Reverend Nicholas Loring, who lived from 1711 to 1763 in North Yarmouth. And he replaced in that church in 1736 a minister named Ammi Cutter. So here you have a minister preaching in a church that he's just come into in the last 3 years or so. And there in the congregation is sitting the former minister, who has a vastly different idea of salvation from what the new minister is saying. So you've got this tension between two ministers in the town, and that's what's going on here. And the Arminians are part of a fundamental part of the Christian church that indicates that a person's decision to make his salvation is what counts, as opposed to the Calvinists, who believed that a person was predestined for salvation or predestined to damnation. These are some of the things that you might go into when you do your historical editing, is explaining what the Arminians and what the Calvinists thought. You can see there are a great many of words that Peter Ware was spelling phonetically. For example, between lines 6 and 7, the first word is moral. The second word is honest. And it took me quite a while to realize that that's honest, because who pronounces the H in honest? So Peter was spelling it phonetically, and those were honest men. Sometimes we have to think outside the box.
That's very helpful.
So Tim, do you have any comments to make on this one?
No, I just have to say it was, I was looking forward to you reading your transcription, because I had I looked at it a little bit earlier this week, and it was one of those ones where I had to take your advice. Well, I threw my hands in the air and then take the advice of asking someone else, and that's you. So this one really did, it did test me a lot. And
this one was a stinker in a way.
Right. I was going to say, I like that it has it demonstrates issues of phonetic spelling, surnames, given names. It has all this, and like you say, it demonstrates how necessary it is to have some historical background about what is going on in the town, to actually be able to say, oh, this does make sense. This could be Armenia, because I think something like the word Armenia does seem slightly out of context in 18th century New Hampshire.
It's not one that we commonly use.
Yes.
But apparently it is a controversy that still goes on between Calvinists and Arminians.
And you said it was mentioned Ammi Cutter.
Yes.
Was he a physician in New Hampshire?
Yes, he was.
Okay,
He was both a physician and a minister.
Okay.
And he preached for a while, and then in North Yarmouth, and then the church essentially asked him to step down because they didn't agree with what he was saying, and then went out and hired this Nicholas Loring, who was a Calvinist, and apparently more in tune with the people who were selecting the ministers, but not necessarily everybody in town, I guess.
Well, he'd be an interesting individual to explore more deeply. But so again, I think that for the sake of time, I know that people may have questions about this one, but I think we should move on to the third and final one. We probably will go over, so everyone, just so you know, we probably will go over the 12 p.m. So feel free to stay on if you're able to, and if not, that's completely fine. Just in case you leave before, I just wanted to point out that, I'll reiterate this at the end, that there's that other event on March 21st at 7 p.m., the John Adams Papers. And we'll be joined by Gwen Fries of the Adams Papers editorial project and Masters of Archives and History program here. The student Francis Beebe will also be joining. So that should be good. And Rodney will send out a link to that.
I will do that for sure. So
okay. So we'll
and
move
also,
on to,
if you have to leave early, remember that this is being recorded. You can come back and see the final moments
yes,
on the recording.
exactly. If you're dying to know what the transcription is, actually that would be me. All right. So I guess
And people are welcome to contact me and ask me too. So
yes, fair enough. And yeah, and again, it is always helpful to sometimes see these documents in person. Actually, we have somebody with their hand up. So let me access this. Oh, I think it went down. Never mind. All right, we'll move on to the next one, and let me post that in the chat.
okay, and this is the final exercise.
Yes, and again,
and what I ask all of the attendees is, if you were including this in a historical edition, what do you think you would be footnoting or commenting on to explain, besides just the transcription? What do you feel should be explained? We'll talk to you all in about 10-15 minutes. Thank you.
So just around 12, we'll say like just a few minutes after 12 or something. We'll reconvene.
Good.
These keep getting a little bit shorter, but
but this is a little easier too.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you might want to mention we can stick around a little longer for those. I don't know. I know what your schedule is, Brian. I don't know what's on your dance card. So so we could probably certainly stay on a little longer for some more Q&A or explain some of the transcriptions. So.
By all means.
Brian, do you want to go ahead and start now? I think
Sure.
This is definitely a shorter one. So
yes, and I think it's also a little easier handwriting. If you'll notice, first of all, in the upper right-hand corner of the page are two numbers. I saw an 88 and I saw a 209 with a line through it, which I have included in my transcript. And this says Province of New Hampshire. And it goes on to say, to the Honorable Meshach Ware, Esquire. You are hereby directed to enlist, that's an INLIST, or impress 3 effective men out of the regiment under your command to reinforce the scouts already posted on the Connecticut River for the same time as your other detachment was, unless they are sooner recalled. And you can see the recalled is superscript. And to march them to Londonderry as soon as possible, there to join a detachment of 15 men from Colonel Atkinson's regiment, and to be under the same officer that leads his men. The sheriff will send you 30 shillings, new tenor, for each man in lieu of ammunition and subsistence. And then it looked to me like there was a WN for that next word, which I take to mean when they arrive on the Connecticut River. And it's given at Portsmouth at arms, August 11th, 1755, signed B. Wentworth. So were there difficulties?
Tim, I'm going to get to a chat here about Eric is talking about annotating, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But I did it. This was Wentworth's handwriting is certainly more legible than Peter Weir's was. I had a couple of things I bracketed and wrote illegible, but then I had a question mark next to it. So yeah, 3, reinforce, and recalled were all difficult at first, but I was able to, after reading it, go back. But I did. It's always interesting to see the phonetic spelling of something like join there. And the one where I was completely unable was the WN. But
Yeah.
it makes total sense that you would infer that was when.
Right. But again, I would put it in brackets.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So you said Eric has something in chat?
Yes. Eric wrote about annotating it. He would like to annotate the following mentions of people. Number 1, the scouts, like who and how many. 2, your other detachment, where were they located and how large was this detachment? Colonel Atkinson's regiment, the sheriff, who was this? In 5, Benning Wentworth, he was the colonial governor of New Hampshire. But what was his official role in this instance? Is he writing as governor or militia/military commander? All really good points.
Excellent.
And yeah, I think that, Eric, that would be all of those 5 points would be really important for contextualizing this and making it more accessible to people who don't have that historical background. And
Right.
Jackie asks, she said, oh, sorry, go on, Brian, my bad.
Well, I was just going to point out that the question would be, why were they being sent to the Connecticut River?
Yes.
And that would be a significant historical event that was going on,
right,
that affected all of New England.
Yes.
And that would be something that I would certainly want to put in context.
And you mean it was the French and Indian War? The
French and Indian Wars.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just because that's the larger context of this letter. It's funny. Jackie mentioned that she thought Portsmouth was quite difficult to read. She had written the word Georgeson, but I guess it does. She's correct here that it is an abbreviated form of Portsmouth.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
I think you mentioned that K. Kirkham mentions that in his book. That a lot of times either given names or sometimes place names are truncated.
Yes. And it does therefore help when a historical editor is adding connotation as to be able to explain that. Yeah. And in fact, I, being a land surveyor, probably I lean more towards actually including a map.
Right. So. Yes. Agreed. How, if you don't mind asking, how did you transition from being a land surveyor to being, I guess it does make sense to some degree, but how was that transition from being a land surveyor to being the director of the records management at the State Archives?
Well, it has to do with the fact that in my land surveying profession, what I was doing was research into land records, which included probate records, which included court decisions, which included a number of things having to do with land boundaries, land rights, and so on. And one of the principal resources that I used was the State Archives. And it got so that I was there so frequently and that they began saying, go get it yourself, because they knew me. And I knew where the collections that we used were. And eventually the archivist said, you know, you've already got 60% of the training done, just doing this work. Why don't you apply for the job? And so it's something that I fell into, and I've died and I've gone to heaven. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I still enjoy surveying, and I still enjoy the crossover between the two professions. And there's a major crossover there.
Right. And well, yeah, and I have to, I think I speak for everyone in the the Masters in History and Archives program at Keene State, that we feel like we've died and gone to heaven because of having you as a resource, because especially during the pandemic, it's been, you've provided access of being able to scan and digitize items for students, which has been
Wonderful.
quite an invaluable resource.
That's what we've hoped for.
I'll just pivot back to the chat real quick. Eric made another good point that when he was reading this, that Schilling's was difficult for him because he didn't see the superscript final S. And I admit, I actually did not see that either. I just kind of inferred that it was yes, which actually, as you said, may not be an actual, my transcription of it might not have actually been completely accurate if I omitted the S.
And that is something that there are two things there that I would make a point of. Number one, seeing the original actually might have made it easier for some of this transcription. Sometimes things do not show up in the digital image that are on the original. So sometimes going back to that original is significant. The second thing that I would want to point out is that, yes, a transcription can be inaccurate. We do the very best we can to try to interpret what the original intent was. And sometimes we've got it wrong. And if you look at the history of documentation from medieval time, I mentioned earlier that I'm studying surveying manuscripts from the Roman period and how they were transmitted throughout the medieval and Renaissance period in Europe. And what it was the originals are long gone. That was over 1,500 years ago. The originals, for the most part, are long gone. What remain of these texts are transcriptions that were made at various times. One of the most famous was a text that was written about 100 AD, but was copied over in 400 AD. We think about that, although the second half of it might have been 800 AD. And so as these texts get written over, they're not necessarily understood by the people who are transcribing them. They've done the best they can, and they may very well be putting errors into it that weren't intended originally. And this is one of the things about the Renaissance, when suddenly lights were going on in scholars' minds, and they began to realize they could go back to Byzantium, or they could go to Alexandria and see the originals and actually begin to say, wait a minute, that makes more sense now than does this transcription of a transcription of a transcription. Mm-hmm. So we do the best we can with transcriptions, and they're helpful, but we have to also recognize the limitations of a transcription.
That makes total sense. It's a historical game of telephone to some degree, it seems like.
That's exactly right. Right. And over 1,000 years or 1,500 years, mistakes can creep in.
Yes. So I don't see anything else more in the chat or the Q&As. So I think we can wrap this up. Thank you, Brian, for joining us. This was really informative, and I'm glad you read your transcription of that second letter, because it's been bothering me all week.
If anybody wants the full transcription, I do have the full transcription.
Okay, that's great. I would like that.
Sure.
So just before we leave, again, thank you everyone for joining us. It was a lot of fun, and just a follow-up event will be on March 21st at 7 p.m. And those are that's a meeting with Gwen Fries, who's who works at the Adams on the Adams Papers editorial project, and she'll be joined by a master's student here from Keene State named Frances Beebe, and they'll talk about that collection. Other than that, I think we will have follow-up information, links to the presentation and also the recording of this. And feel free to reach out to Brian, me, or Rodney with any follow-up questions you have, and we'd be more than happy to answer them.
Yes.
So thank you.